Ves intro SFs. Before you waste your time, pause, not to judge yourself, not to shame yourself, but to listen. Time is not just hours and minutes slipping through our fingers. Time is life energy. And most of us are not actually wasting time. We are giving it away in quiet, unconscious ways. We give it away to distractions that soothe our pain, to habits that protect us from feeling, to expectations that were never truly ours. When we rush, numb, overwork, scroll, or procrastinate, it's rarely because we are lazy or careless. It's often because somewhere inside, there is discomfort we haven't learned how to sit with. This sermon is not a warning shouted from above. It's an invitation spoken gently from within. Before you waste your time, ask not, what am I doing wrong? But, what am I avoiding feeling? Because when awareness enters the room, time stops being an enemy and starts becoming a teacher. And as Begaber Mate often points toward, the moment we bring compassionate awareness to our patterns, we reclaim not only our time, but our wholeness. 5 Kenos. 1. Time is often wasted as a coping mechanism, not a moral failure. 2. Disconnection from self leads to misdirection of time. 3. Business can be a socially approved form of escape. 4. Healing unresolved pain restores clarity and focus. 5. Presence is the doorway to meaningful use of time. Keynote, no one expanded. When we talk about wasting time, we usually carry an undertone of self-blame. We label ourselves as undisciplined, unfocused, unmotivated. But this framing misses something essential. Human beings don't act against their own interests without a reason. When time disappears into habits we later regret, it's rarely because we don't value life. It's more often because, at some level, we are trying to survive an internal experience that feels overwhelming. The nervous system does not care about productivity. It cares about safety. So when the body senses emotional threat, shame, fear, loneliness, inadequacy, it reaches for whatever offers relief, even if that relief costs hours, days, years. Think about how often time is lost not in joy, but in numbness. Endless scrolling, binge, watching, overworking, constant noise. These are not random behaviors. They are adaptive responses learned early, often before we had words for what we felt. A child who learns that their emotions are inconvenient, ignored, or punished will eventually learn to disconnect from those emotions. That disconnection doesn't disappear with age, it just changes its costume. In adulthood, it may look like, I don't know where my time goes, but the time didn't go nowhere. It went toward managing pain quietly. From this perspective, wasting time is not the problem. It's the signal. A signal that something inside is asking for attention, for acknowledgement, for compassion. And the tragedy is that when we attack ourselves for wasting time, we deepen the very pain that drives the behavior. Self-criticism tightens the nervous system. It creates more discomfort, which then demands more distraction. The cycle continues, not because we lack willpower, but because we are trapped in a loop of unmet emotional needs. If you look honestly, you may notice that the moments you lose the most time are moments when being present feels unsafe. Stillness can bring up grief. Silence can bring up anger. Unstructured time can bring up the question, Is this all I am? So the mind rushes to fill the space. Time is sacrificed not out of carelessness, but out of self-protection. And once you see that, a different response becomes possible. Instead of asking, "How do I stop wasting time?" you might ask, "What am I soothing right now?" That single question shifts the entire inner relationship. Compassion does not mean indulgence. It means understanding causation. When you understand why a behavior exists, you gain the power to choose differently. Awareness loosens the grip of automaticity. The moment you notice, without judgment, "I'm reaching for this because I feel empty," you are no longer fully controlled by the impulse. You are present, and presence, even for a few seconds, interrupts the pattern, not by force, but by clarity. Over time, as emotional awareness grows, the need to escape shrinks. Time begins to feel less like something to kill and more like something to inhabit. People often discover that motivation returns naturally, not as pressure, but as alignment. When actions arise from connection rather than avoidance, energy is no longer drained by inner conflict. You don't need to manage time as aggressively, because you are no longer running from yourself within it. This is why healing is not separate from productivity. A regulated nervous system does not need constant distraction. A person who feels safe inside does not have to waste time to survive the moment. They may still rest, still play, still do nothing, but it feels chosen, nourishing, alive. And the paradox is that when time is no longer used to escape pain, it becomes available for meaning, for creativity, for genuine rest, for relationships, for growth that doesn't come from fear, but from truth, from an inner yes rather than an inner collapse, from the quiet recognition that your time has always been trying to take care of you, even when it looked like self-sabotage, even when the clock kept moving and you felt left behind, because underneath the habit was a nervous system saying, "I need relief. I need gentleness. I need to not feel this alone." And until that need is met, time will keep slipping into the same familiar patterns. Asking not for discipline first, but for understanding. When there is disconnection from the self, time does not disappear randomly. It gets redirected toward whatever keeps us from noticing that disconnection. A person who is in touch with their inner signals tends to feel when something is meaningful, when something is draining, when something no longer fits. But when that inner sensing is muted, time becomes vulnerable to external forces. Algorithms decide. Other people's expectations decide. Old survival patterns decide. And we later look back and wonder how entire days, years, even decades were spent chasing things that never truly nourished us. Disconnection from the self rarely begins in adulthood. It usually begins early, when being authentic felt risky. If expressing anger led to rejection, anger was suppressed. If expressing sadness led to dismissal, sadness was buried. If curiosity disrupted the system, curiosity was narrowed. Over time, the body learns to override its own signals in order to maintain attachment and belonging. The cost of this adaptation is internal guidance. And without guidance, time has no compass. When you don't feel what you feel, you can't know what you need. So time gets invested in substitutes: approval instead of connection, achievement instead of meaning, stimulation instead of presence. These substitutes are not chosen consciously, they are inherited strategies. They keep us busy enough to avoid the quiet question underneath. Who am I when I'm not performing, pleasing, or distracting myself? That question can feel threatening to a nervous system shaped by disconnection. So time rushes in to cover it up. You may notice that misdirected time often has a compulsive quality. It doesn't feel restful, even when it looks like rest. It doesn't feel fulfilling, even when it looks productive. There is a subtle urgency to it, a sense of needing to keep going. That urgency is not about ambition, it's about avoidance. Stillness might bring sensation. Sensation might bring emotion. Emotion might bring memory, and memory might bring pain that was never metabolized. So time is filled, not lived. From this lens, the question is not, why am I bad with time? But, what part of me am I disconnected from that time is being used to compensate for? As Vars Gabermete often emphasizes, behavior makes sense when you understand the context in which it developed. A disconnected self will always outsource direction. Without an internal yes or no, life becomes reactive. Whatever is loudest, most urgent, or most rewarded in the environment takes over the calendar. This is why people can be incredibly busy and deeply unfulfilled at the same time. The business is not aligned with inner truth. It is aligned with learned roles. And roles consume time endlessly because they are never fully satisfied. There is always more to prove, more to fix, more to earn. Meanwhile, the quiet signals of the body, fatigue, boredom, resentment, longing, are ignored. These signals are not weaknesses. They are navigation tools. When they are silenced, time loses direction. Reconnection does not start with better scheduling. It starts with restoring the relationship to inner experience. Not forcing insight, but allowing curiosity. Not demanding clarity, but noticing sensation. Even small moments of self-attunement begin to shift how time is used. When you feel your body tense before saying yes, you pause. When you notice emptiness after a certain activity, you question it. When you feel energy rise during something simple and quiet, you take it seriously. Time starts reorganizing itself around aliveness rather than obligation. This process can feel uncomfortable at first. Disconnection protected you once. Letting go of it means feeling what was postponed. But as awareness grows, something else emerges alongside the discomfort: relief. Relief that you no longer have to keep running. Relief that time does not have to be filled to be tolerable. Relief that there is an inner reference point returning, slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And as that reference point strengthens, time begins to move differently. It no longer pulls you away from yourself. It begins to orbit around what is real, what is felt, what is true, around the parts of you that were never lost, only unheard, waiting patiently beneath the noise, beneath the schedules, beneath the years that seemed misused, not because you didn't care about life, but because you were trying to live it without access to yourself. Business is rarely questioned because it is rewarded. In many cultures, The busiest person is seen as the most valuable, the most driven, the most alive. We praise full calendars, exhaustion, and constant motion without asking what all that movement is protecting us from. Business becomes a mask, one that looks like ambition on the outside, but often functions as escape on the inside. When life is packed with tasks, responsibilities, and noise, there is very little room left to feel. And for many people, feeling is precisely what feels unsafe. From an early age, we learn that slowing down can be risky. Stillness invites questions. Silence invites emotion. Unstructured time invites the self. If a person grew up in an environment where emotions were overwhelming, dismissed, or burdensome to others, the nervous system adapts by staying occupied. Movement becomes regulation. Doing becomes safety. Over time, this strategy is reinforced not only internally but socially. The world applauds productivity, not presence. So the escape becomes invisible, even virtuous. What makes business especially powerful as an escape is that it doesn't look like avoidance. It looks responsible. It looks disciplined. It looks necessary. You're not withdrawing from life, you're over-engaging with it. Yet there is a subtle cost. When every moment is filled, there is no space to notice whether the life being lived actually belongs to you. Business can drown out inner signals just as effectively as substances or screens. Fatigue replaces feeling. Deadlines replace reflection. Achievement replaces meaning. You may notice that chronic business often comes with a sense of urgency that never resolves. Even when tasks are completed, the relief is brief. Another task rushes in to take its place. This is not because there is so much to do, but because stopping feels uncomfortable. When the body finally rests, sensations surface: tension, sadness, restlessness, emptiness. These sensations are not new, they were simply postponed. Business kept them at bay. And because society rewards that postponement, there is little incentive to question it. As Gaber Matas often points out, we don't develop coping mechanisms randomly. We develop them in response to our environment. Business is one such mechanism. It helps us avoid unresolved pain while maintaining social approval. You're not numbing out in a way that alarms others. You're being productive. And so the cycle continues, unnoticed and unchallenged. The danger is not that we are doing too much, but that we are using doing to avoid being. When identity becomes fused with usefulness, rest begins to feel like failure. Presence feels unearned. Worth becomes conditional. Time is no longer experienced as life unfolding, but as something to be filled, conquered, survived. And in that survival mode, deeper needs are ignored, not because they don't matter, but because there is never a good time to listen to them. Business also fragments attention. When the mind is constantly switching tasks, there is little opportunity for integration. Experiences don't settle. Emotions don't complete. Lessons don't land. Life becomes a series of reactions rather than a coherent story. And because nothing is fully metabolized, the urge to stay busy intensifies. The unfinished accumulates beneath the surface, adding pressure, adding weight, adding more reason to keep moving. Questioning business is not a call to irresponsibility. It's a call to honesty. What happens when you stop? What arises when there is nothing demanding your attention? Those moments reveal whether business is aligned with purpose or driven by avoidance. And often, what emerges is not laziness, but grief for the parts of life that were rushed through, for the parts of the self that were postponed, for the quiet knowing that something essential has been waiting underneath the noise. When business loosens its grip, even slightly, a different relationship with time becomes possible. Time is no longer an enemy to outrun, but a space to inhabit. Action can come from clarity rather than compulsion. Rest can come without guilt. An escape is no longer needed when presence feels safe, when the self no longer has to be avoided, when life does not need to be constantly filled in order to be bearable. When unresolved pain lives beneath the surface, it doesn't stay contained. It shapes attention. It pulls energy inward. It fragments focus. A mind carrying emotional weight cannot fully commit to the present moment because part of it is busy holding something down. This is why clarity is not merely a cognitive skill. It is an emotional condition. When pain is unacknowledged, attention becomes divided. You may be physically present, but internally preoccupied, reacting rather than choosing, moving through time without a clear sense of direction. Unresolved pain often comes from experiences that were too much to process when they occurred. Loss without support, fear without reassurance, shame without repair. The nervous system learned to protect itself by pushing these experiences out of conscious awareness. But what is pushed away does not disappear. It continues to demand energy. That energy is taken from focus, from creativity, from the capacity to stay with one thing long enough for meaning to emerge. Distraction, in this sense, is not a failure of discipline. It is the nervous system asking for relief. Many people try to force clarity through external strategies, better routines, stricter schedules, stronger willpower. While these tools can help at a surface level, they rarely address the underlying interference. Pain that has not been felt will continue to interrupt. It shows up as restlessness, fatigue, irritability, overthinking, or the inability to complete tasks that actually matter. The mind wanders not because it is weak, but because it is burdened. Healing begins when pain is allowed to come into awareness with safety. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually and compassionately. When an emotion is felt instead of avoided, the nervous system no longer has to work so hard to suppress it. This frees energy. That energy naturally returns to the present moment. Focus improves not because you are trying harder, but because there is less internal resistance. Clarity emerges as a byproduct of integration. As us, Gaber Metaf often emphasizes, trauma is not what happens to us, but what happens inside us when we are left alone with what happened. Healing, then, is not about revisiting the past endlessly. It is about completing experiences that were interrupted. When an emotion is acknowledged, it can move. When it moves, it resolves. And when it resolves, it no longer hijacks attention. You may notice that after moments of emotional honesty, crying, expressing anger safely, naming grief, telling the truth to yourself, there is often a sense of mental spaciousness. The mind feels quieter, decisions feel simpler, priorities reorganize themselves. This is not coincidence. The system is no longer overloaded. Focus returns because it is no longer being used to guard against pain. Clarity is also relational. When unresolved pain exists, it often creates inner conflict. One part of you wants to move forward, another part wants to stay safe. This conflict creates paralysis or scattered effort. Healing aligns these parts. When the protective strategies are understood and thanked rather than fought, they soften. The system becomes more coherent. Action becomes less forced. Focus becomes more stable. Importantly, healing does not make life effortless. It makes it honest. There may still be challenges, but they are faced with presence rather than avoidance. Attention can stay with discomfort without needing to escape it immediately. This capacity to remain present with what is the foundation of sustained focus. A regulated nervous system can tolerate complexity. It can stay engaged. It can choose rather than react. As pain resolves, time begins to feel different. Hours are no longer lost to mental noise. Effort feels proportional. You may find yourself naturally drawn to fewer things, but with greater depth. This is clarity. Not knowing everything, but knowing enough to move in a direction that feels true. Focus becomes an expression of alignment rather than pressure. And alignment is what emerges when the past is no longer demanding all of your attention. When the present moment is no longer crowded by unprocessed pain. When the mind is no longer busy defending against what has already happened, and can finally rest in what is happening now. Presence changes the quality of time before it ever changes how time is used. When you are present, you are no longer relating to time as something to escape, manage, or outrun. You are inside it, and from that place, choices begin to emerge that are rooted in awareness rather than impulse. Meaningful use of time does not begin with planning. It begins with contact, with the body, with sensation, with what is actually happening right now. Without presence, time is easily consumed by automatic patterns. The day fills itself. Habits take over. Reactions masquerade as decisions. You may look back and feel that time has vanished, not because it moved quickly, but because you were never fully there to inhabit it. Presence interrupts this. It slows the internal pace, even if the external pace remains the same. And in that slowing, discernment becomes possible. Presence is not a technique, it is a state of relationship. It means being available to your own experience without immediately trying to change it. This can feel uncomfortable at first. When presence deepens, sensations arise, emotions surface, thoughts lose their background invisibility. For someone who has spent years using time to avoid inner experience, presence can feel threatening. Yet it is precisely this contact that restores agency. When you are present, you can feel when something is nourishing and when it is draining. Time stops being wasted, not because you are stricter with yourself, but because you are more attuned. As Ars Geber often emphasizes, awareness is curative. When awareness is absent, behaviors run on autopilot. When awareness is present, choice appears. That choice may be subtle, a pause before saying yes, a breath before reaching for distraction, a moment of noticing tension in the body. But those moments accumulate. They reshape how time unfolds. Meaning arises not from doing more, but from being fully with what you are doing. A few minutes of presence can be more life-giving than hours spent dissociated. When you are present, even rest becomes restorative. Even work becomes more focused. Even silence has texture. Time feels fuller, not because it is packed, but because it is inhabited. Presence also reveals misalignment. When you are present, you can feel the internal resistance that arises during certain activities. You notice the dullness, the contraction, the sense of being pulled away from yourself. These signals are not obstacles. They are information. Without presence, they are ignored, and time continues to be invested in what depletes. With presence, they guide redirection. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but honestly. Importantly, presence does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees truth. And truth is what allows time to be used meaningfully. When you are present, you may realize that some things you've been pursuing are driven by fear rather than desire. You may notice grief for time already lost. You may feel longing for something unnamed. These experiences are not detours. They are doorways. Passing through them restores contact with what matters. As presence stabilizes, urgency loosens. You are less compelled to fill every moment. You begin to trust that nothing essential will be lost by pausing. In fact, pausing becomes the way you stop losing yourself. Time is no longer something to be killed or conquered. It becomes a medium through which life expresses itself. From this place, meaningful use of time arises naturally. You don't have to force priorities, they reveal themselves. You don't have to chase purpose, it emerges from alignment. Presence becomes the filter through which time passes, refining what stays and what falls away. And as that filter strengthens, time begins to feel less fragmented and more coherent, less burdensome and more alive. Less like something slipping through your hands and more like something meeting you exactly where you are. Moment by moment, breath by breath, with nothing required except your willingness to be here.